The moment Odessa sat down at that backyard table, Zola already knew. Not suspected, not feared, knew. She had been watching that woman for 16 years, the way you watch weather, not because you're afraid of rain, but because you've learned to read what's coming before anyone else sees the clouds. So when Odessa stood up at that birthday cookout and tapped her cup, Zola set her sweet tea down. Slow, steady, like somebody who had just heard a starting gun go off in a race everyone else thought hadn't started yet. What happened in the next 4 minutes destroyed 3 people. And Zola didn't say a single word. Not when Odessa's voice cut through the music. Not when the yard went so quiet you could hear the paper lanterns moving in the wind. Not when her own daughters grabbed each other's hands and held on. Not when those divorce papers landed on the birthday table like a verdict somebody had spent months preparing. She just stood there, watching. With the kind of stillness that doesn't come from weakness, it comes from a woman who already knows exactly how the story ends, and is simply waiting for everyone else to catch up. But here is what nobody at that cookout understood. Here is what Odessa never thought to ask. Whose name do you think was on the deed to that yard they were all standing in? Before we go any further, if you are new here, hit that subscribe button right now. We tell stories on this channel that will make you feel something real. Stories about real strength, real betrayal, and what happens when people underestimate the wrong woman. You do not want to miss what comes next. Now let's get into it. The backyard on Delwood Avenue was something else that evening. Somebody had strung paper lanterns from the fence post all the way to the old magnolia tree in the corner. Folding tables were covered in a plastic tablecloth, the color of deep plum, held down at the corners with mason jars stuffed with wildflowers. A portable speaker near the side gate was running an old Jill Scott record low and warm into the summer air. The smell of ribs coming off the pit hit you before you even made it through the back gate. It was a block away from where Zola had grown up. Same zip code. Same kind of neighborhood where everybody knew your name and your mama's name and who you used to be before you became who you are now. She had wanted to have the party here, at the house, in the yard. Not at some rented hall, not at a restaurant, airy, because this was where she felt most like herself. Zola stood near the food table in a burnt orange wrap dress. She was 44 years old, and she wore it the way some women wear every year they have survived, not hiding anything, not explaining anything. Just present. There was a stillness in her that people who did not know her often read wrong. They thought she was passive. They thought she was soft. They thought the silence meant she did not see what they were doing. She saw everything. Her twin daughters, Imani and Zuri, were 11 years old and running loose through the yard in matching yellow sundresses, playing some made-up game that involved a lot of screaming and falling in the grass. Every few minutes, Zola would catch a flash of yellow darting past, and her whole face would change, all the weight she was carrying just lifting, just for that second, every single time she looked at those girls. She poured herself a cup of sweet tea, leaned against the table, and watched the yard fill up with people she had known most of her life. Cousins, neighbors, old classmates, her girls' teachers. People who had shown up in good faith, in good clothes, bringing foil-covered pans and birthday cards and genuine love. They did not know what was coming. Neither did she. Not exactly. Not yet. Tremaine showed up 40 minutes late. Not the kind of late where you apologize when you walk in. The kind of late where your arrival itself is the message. He came through the side gate in a fresh linen shirt, phone already in his hand, barely scanning the yard before his eyes landed on one person. Not Zola. His mother. Odessa was a woman built like a church mother and operating like a prosecutor. She was 67, dressed in all black like she was attending something more serious than a birthday party, and she had positioned herself near the magnolia tree with the energy of someone who had already decided how the evening was going to end. Tremaine walked directly to her. They hugged. He leaned down. She said something into his ear. He nodded. Then he drifted to the other side of the yard and found his boy, Pharaoh, and the two of them fell into a private conversation near the pit that had nothing to do with the party. Zola watched all of this from the food table. She took a slow sip of sweet tea and turned to her cousin Brenda, who had just walked over, and she smiled at her as if nothing had happened. Like she had not just watched her husband of 16 years walk into her birthday party and walk straight past her to his mother. Because that was Zola. She did not express her pain in public. Then the side gate opened again, and the yard shifted, not loudly, not dramatically. The way the air changes before a storm, you feel it before you see anything, before you can name it, before you can point to exactly what changed. Her name was Celestine. She was somewhere in her mid-30s, dressed for an event that was not this one, heels on a grass lawn, hair done like she had somewhere important to be afterward. She did not have an invitation. She walked in through that gate like the latch had been left open specifically for her. Tremaine looked up from across the yard. He did not look surprised. He waved her over. He introduced her to two people nearby as a colleague from the firm. Some people smiled politely. Some people looked down at their plates. Some people looked at Zola. Zola had already turned back to the food table. She was slicing the birthday cake with the focused attention of a woman who was choosing, deliberately and intentionally, not to give anyone the satisfaction of watching her react. She handed Amani the first slice. She handed Zuri the second. She kissed them both on top of their heads, and she kept moving. But here is the thing about Zola that nobody in that yard understood yet. Every move she did not make was a move she was saving. Before this goes where it's about to go, drop a comment right now and tell us, where are you watching from? We got people tuning in from all over, and we love knowing where our community is. Drop your city, your state, anywhere. Let's see how far this reaches. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. Now back to the story. The birthday toast was supposed to be simple. Husband raises a glass, guests clap, children steal icing off the cake when nobody is looking. That was the plan. What happened instead was the kind of thing people in that neighborhood would still be talking about 3 years later at cookouts, at church, at hair salons, in hushed voices that got a little louder every time the story was told. Odessa stood up. She did not wait for anyone to call on her. She did not ask permission. She picked up a plastic fork and tapped it against her red Solo cup until the yard went quiet, one conversation at a time. The Jill Scott record faded into the background. Children slowed down in the grass. Adults turned in their folding chairs. Then Odessa straightened her back, looked out over the plum tablecloths and the mason jar flowers and the people who had come to celebrate her daughter-in-law's birthday, and she began to speak. She did not call it a toast. She said she had something that needed to be said, something long overdue. She said she had watched her son spend 16 years married to a woman who had always been beneath him. She said she had held her tongue out of respect for the marriage, but that marriage was ending now, and she no longer had any reason to hold anything back. She said Zola had come from nothing, had married into something, and had spent years pretending those two things were equal. She said her son deserved a woman who matched him in standing, in ambition, in understanding of what the Beaumont name represented in this community. The yard was a cemetery. The music had stopped. Somebody cut it. Or maybe nobody noticed it stopping because the silence was so total it swallowed everything around it. Children had frozen mid-step in the grass. Tremaine was standing near the pit with his cup in his hand, and his eyes trained on the ground like the dirt had suddenly become the most interesting thing he had ever seen. Pharaoh was looking at his phone like it held the secrets of the universe. Celestine was standing near the cake table with an expression that was almost a smile. The kind of smile a person works very hard to keep off their face, but doesn't quite succeed. Then Odessa reached into her handbag. She pulled out a brown envelope, thick and official-looking, the kind that comes from an attorney's office. And the yard, if it was possible, went even more still. She walked it across that backyard slowly, past the folding tables, past the cousins who could not bring themselves to look at her, past the paper lanterns swaying gently in the evening air, like they had no idea what they were witnessing. She placed that envelope on the birthday table, right next to the cake that Zola had just finished slicing. She looked at Zola and said, "Happy birthday. Consider this your real gift." Zola looked at the envelope. She already knew what was inside. Divorce papers, signed, notarized, prepared by Odessa's own attorney and pushed in front of Tremaine to sign without a single conversation between husband and wife. 16 years of marriage, dissolved on paper and delivered at a birthday party like it was nothing more than an overdue bill. The audacity of it was breathtaking, and still Zola said nothing. Imani moved first, 11 years old. She stepped forward and placed herself between her mother and that envelope like she already understood, the way children sometimes understand things before they have words for them, that what had just been set on that table was not paper. It was an attack. Zuri reached for Zola's hand from the other side, lacing her small fingers through her mother's and holding on with both hands, the way you hold someone when the ground shifts and you need to know something solid is still there. Zola looked down at both of her daughters. She put one hand on Imani's shoulder. She squeezed Zuri's hand once, firm, steady, the way you hold somebody when you need them to feel the ground through you because theirs has shifted beneath them. Then she looked at the envelope. Then she looked at Odessa. Then she looked at Tremaine. He did not move. He did not speak. He did not lift his eyes from the ground. The man who had walked into this yard 40 minutes late, who had waved another woman through the side gate of his wife's birthday party, who had stood near the pit laughing with his friend while his mother loaded a weapon and aimed it, that man had nothing to say now. Zola nodded. Once, slowly, not in defeat, not in surrender, in recognition. The way you nod when something you have been expecting finally arrives, not early, not late, but exactly on the schedule you calculated it would. The kind of nod that says, I know something you don't, and you just made the last mistake you are going to get to make. What Odessa did not know. What Tremaine did not know. What not one single person standing in that Delwood Avenue backyard that evening could have possibly imagined. Every inch of the ground beneath their feet belonged to Zola. The house, the yard. The magnolia tree in the corner has the paper lanterns hanging from its branches. The address that Odessa had already told her attorney would revert cleanly to the Beaumont family once the divorce was finalized. All of it. But to understand how, you have to go back. Way back, before the burnt orange dress and the sweet tea and the divorce papers on the birthday table. Before any of this. You have to go back to a place that most people who knew Zola now would not have recognized at all. She grew up in the Westfield Courts apartments, 3rd floor, Unit 14CE, in a part of the city that the rest of the city had quietly decided to stop thinking about. The elevator broke every winter without fail. The hallways held onto the smell of old cooking and something damp that never fully dried, no matter the season. Her mother, Nadine, worked double shifts at a hospital laundry facility for 22 years. She did not miss days. When she was sick, she went anyway, because missing a day meant something didn't get paid, and in Unit 14CA, everything had to get paid or something got cut off. Nadine did not talk about struggle the way people perform struggle for sympathy. She lived through it and made sure her daughter watched her living through it, because watching was the real lesson. Zola watched, and she took notes without being told to. When Zola was 13, Nadine sat her down at the kitchen table with a library book and a yellow legal pad and taught her what a property deed was. What it meant to own land outright versus renting it from someone who could snatch it back the moment you missed a payment. She walked her through property tax, equity, zoning laws, inheritance rights at the kitchen table after a double shift, still in her work shoes, because Nadine believed that the most important classroom her daughter would ever sit in was that kitchen. She said, "Baby, people will take everything from you in this life if you let them. Your job, your health, your man. But land they have to fight you for. Land is the only thing that fights back." Zola wrote that down on the yellow legal pad. She kept the page. She went to college on a Pell Grant, and 3 scholarship applications she filled out herself at the public library on Thursfield Road because their apartment didn't have reliable internet. She studied real estate law, got her MBA at night while working at a property management firm during the day. She started buying small, a duplex in a neighborhood everyone else had written off as done, then a 4-unit building 2 blocks over. Then, a commercial strip on a corridor the city had quietly begun rezoning, which Zola knew about because she read zoning board minutes the way other people read their morning news. She built quietly, no announcements, no social media, no dinner party conversations about her portfolio. She did not tell Tremaine the full picture, not out of deception, but because Nadine had taught her one more thing at that kitchen table that never left her. A woman who knows what she owns never has to prove it to anyone. She just has to wait for the moment the proof becomes necessary. She had been waiting. For a long time she had been waiting. After the birthday party, things did not collapse in fire. They leaked. That is how real betrayal moves through a home. Not in explosions that at least have the decency to announce themselves. In slow, cold water that rises so gradually you almost convince yourself it isn't rising at all until you realize it's already at your chin and still climbing. Tremaine stopped coming home before midnight. When he was home, he was somewhere else entirely, sitting at the kitchen table with his eyes aimed past the wall, past Zola, past the daughters he had helped bring into the world who were upstairs doing homework and pretending not to notice that their father had become a ghost who happened to sleep in the house. Odessa moved faster than Zola had anticipated. Within 2 weeks of the birthday party, she had met privately with a divorce attorney, not Tremaine's, her own personal attorney, and had begun constructing a legal strategy built entirely on one central assumption: that Zola had nothing significant of her own, that the assets were Tremaine's by nature, that the house, the cars, everything accumulated over 16 years of marriage belonged functionally to the Beaumont name and would be returned to it without much of a fight. She believed this without a single doubt. She had no reason to. Zola had never given her one. Tremaine signed documents his mother prepared for him in the raw, unguarded weeks after the birthday party. He did not read them carefully. He was in the kind of pain that makes people careless, not the sharp pain that clarifies and focuses, but the dull, suffocating kind that makes a person just want the whole thing to be finished. He trusted his mother. He always had trusted her more than he trusted his own judgment. That trust was about to cost him in ways no one had prepared him to calculate. Celestine, meanwhile, had spent 14 months embedding herself into the edges of Tremaine's life with the patience and precision of someone running a long, carefully considered play. Professional events first, then dinners with mutual friends. Then the 4th of July cookout, where she appeared without an invitation, and Tremaine introduced her as somebody from work, and Zola had smiled, refilled the lemonade pitcher, and filed the information in the place inside herself where she kept everything she was not yet ready to use. Because here was the thing about Zola that Celestine had never once stopped to consider. You cannot outmaneuver a woman who is letting you believe you're winning. The hardest part was not Tremaine. It was not even Odessa. The hardest part was Amani coming downstairs one Thursday night and sitting at the kitchen counter in front of a full plate of food she wasn't touching. Just sitting there, fork in hand, moving rice around in slow circles with her eyes somewhere far away from that kitchen, somewhere nobody else in the room could reach her. The hardest part was Zuri leaving the hallway light on every single night. 11 years old. Needing that thin line of light under her bedroom door because the dark had started feeling like something that could swallow her whole. The hardest part came on a Tuesday night when Zola was sitting at the foot of Zuri's bed, rubbing slow circles into her back while she drifted toward sleep. Zuri turned over and looked up at her mother with those enormous, serious eyes and asked in a voice barely above a whisper, "Mama, is Daddy going to leave us?" Zola did not lie. She did not reach for a comfortable answer that would unravel the moment Zuri was old enough to remember it clearly. She smoothed the blanket up over her daughter's shoulders, looked her directly in the eye, and said, "Whatever happens between your daddy and me, you and your sister have me. All of me. Every single part. That is not changing. You hear me? That is never changing." Zuri nodded. That same slow, steady nod her mother had given Odessa in the backyard. Then she closed her eyes. Zola sat at the foot of that bed until the child's breathing went deep and even. Then she walked to the kitchen, stood at the sink, turned the cold water on, and let herself feel everything she kept locked down in the daylight hours. The grief of watching a marriage hollow itself out from the inside while she kept the exterior standing. The fury she refused to perform for an audience. The exhaustion of being the only person in a burning house, making sure the children got out safely while everyone else stood outside watching it burn. She felt every bit of it. Then she turned the water off, dried her hands, opened her phone to a number she had never once dialed carelessly in 18 years. His name was Cornelius Tate, Esquire, 71 years old, had never lost a property case in 4 decades of practice, had been Zola's attorney, her most trusted advisor, and the quiet co-architect of everything she had ever built since she was 26 years old, and walked into his office on Meridian Street with a manila folder, a yellow legal pad, and a precision of vision that had made him stop mid-sentence, set his pen down, and really look at her for the first time. He had told her that afternoon, "Most people walk in here and tell me what they have. You walked in here and showed me what you see. That's a different thing entirely. That's rare." 18 years later, she called him from the dark backyard on Delwood Avenue, sitting at the same table where Odessa had placed those divorce papers 6 hours before. The lanterns were down. The yard was empty. Just Zola and the magnolia tree and the night air and everything she had spent nearly 2 decades building in complete silence. She let the quiet hold her for a long time before she dialed. Cornelius answered before the second ring. He always answered before the second ring. She said, "Cornelius, it's time." He did not ask if she was certain. He did not give a speech. 18 years of working together meant they were long past the need for either of those things. He said, "Everything is in place, Zola. Has been for 8 months. I've been waiting on your word." She thanked him. She ended the call. She sat in that dark yard a while longer, on the same chair where her birthday cake had sat earlier that evening. Not in grief, not in anger, not in defeat. She sat the way a woman sits when she is about to open a door that has been shut for a very long time. Steady, unhurried, completely certain of what is on the other side. We are right in the middle of this story, and I need you locked in for what comes next, because this is where everything Odessa built comes apart at the seams, publicly, in front of everybody. If you have watched this far and you are not subscribed, fix that right now. Hit the button and drop a comment telling us where you are watching from, your city, your state, wherever you are in the world. We read every single one. Now stay with me. You absolutely cannot leave now. The annual Westfield Community Recognition Gala was held 6 weeks after the birthday party. It was outdoors, on the grounds of the newly rebuilt Aldridge Community Center, the one that had sat as a gutted, boarded-up shell on Pembroke Street for 11 years, while the neighborhood around it slowly stopped believing anything good was ever coming back to that block. Round tables spread out under open canopy tents. A live band working through old-school R&B at the far end of the grounds. Women in evening gowns, men in tailored suits. The kind of event where a community comes together to celebrate what it has managed to build despite everything that was stacked against it. Everyone who mattered in that community was there, including the Beaumonts. Tremaine arrived with Celestine on his arm, a statement. Odessa on his left side, a stronghold. They moved through the space like a unit, working the room, accepting handshakes and receiving compliments on how well Tremaine was holding up through everything. Odessa was in Burgundy, fully in her element, radiating the social authority of a woman who had spent 30 years carefully constructing a reputation in this community and had every intention of protecting it tonight. She did not yet know that the room itself was about to tell a story she had not written and could not edit. Zola arrived 40 minutes after them. She came through the main entrance alone. Deep green gown, clean, simple lines. The thin gold chain at her throat carried a small flat key pendant, worn smooth from years of being touched, barely noticeable unless you were standing close enough to really look. She walked in without hurry, without announcement, with that same unhurried, earth-rooted stride she had carried her whole life, the stride of a woman who is never in a rush to arrive somewhere she is already completely certain of. And the room noticed, not loudly, the way a room notices something it wasn't expecting and doesn't immediately have language for. Conversations near the entrance tapered off mid-sentence. Someone set their glass down slowly. Someone touched their companion on the arm without saying a word, just touched their arm and tilted their head slightly in Zola's direction. She greeted a few people warmly, accepted a glass of water from a passing server, found a seat near the center of the tent and sat down with the ease of a woman who is completely at home in any space she enters, which had less to do with confidence and everything to do with something deeper. The rootedness of a woman who knows exactly where she stands and has known for a very long time. Tremaine saw her from across the tent. His face shifted. Not guilt exactly. Something underneath guilt and more complicated than it is. The look of a man who had been certain he understood the shape of a situation, who had been sleeping reasonably well inside that certainty for weeks, and was only now, standing there in a tailored suit with a drink going warm in his hand, beginning to sense that the shape was different from what he thought. That something had been off in his calculations for longer than he realized. He could not have named what changed. He just felt it. The way you feel a storm that hasn't arrived yet. The evening's host was Dr. Adis Okonkwo, 30 years in this community, for 30 years as a family physician and a leading philanthropist. The kind of woman whose word was, without debate or qualification, the most trusted currency in any room she walked into. She approached the microphone. The band played itself quietly. The tent settled into attention. Doctor. Okonkwo thanked the guests, spoke about what the Aldridge Center represented to a neighborhood that had waited 11 years for something to believe in again, and then said she had one announcement she had been holding on to all evening. One she was particularly honored to deliver. She said the complete renovation of the Aldridge Community Center, the new community health wing attached to it, and the full scholarship endowment being launched tonight in partnership with 3 local high schools. Every dollar of it had been funded by a single private philanthropic contribution. She said the organization behind it had been operating quietly in this community for over 15 years, buying property, building equity, waiting patiently for the moment the scale was right to give back in a way that would genuinely last generations. She paused. Then she said the name, Nadine's Ground, LLC. The tent went still in the specific way that happens when a name lands before anyone fully understands why it landed or what it means yet. Doctor. Okonkwo said she would like to invite the founder to come forward. Zola set her water glass down on the table. She stood up. She smoothed the front of her gown and walked to that microphone the same way she had walked into the gala, the same way she had walked through every room her entire life. The same way she had stood in that birthday backyard while her husband looked at the ground and his mother placed divorce papers next to her birthday cake like they were a gift she should be grateful for. Unhurried, unshaken, completely unbroken, she faced the crowd and she spoke for 5 minutes. She said her mother's name first. Let it sit in the air over all those candle centerpieces and all those round tables full of people dressed in their finest. She said that everything she had ever built, every property, every acquisition, every quiet strategic decision made over 15 years started at a kitchen table in Unit 14C of the Westfield Courts Apartments with a woman in a hospital laundry uniform, a library book about property deeds, and a daughter who wrote everything down on a yellow legal pad and kept every single page. She said she had built quietly because her mother taught her that the loudest thing a woman can do in a room full of people who have counted her out is simply outlast them. She thanked Cornelius Tate, who was seated near the back of the tent with a small, restrained smile that his entire composed face was working very hard to keep modest. She looked toward the table where Amani and Zuri were seated, both girls in deep green to match their mother, sitting straight, hands folded, eyes locked onto her like she was the only thing in the entire tent worth watching. She smiled at her daughters. They smiled back. Then she stepped away from the microphone, and the screen behind the center tent pole lit up. Clean, professional, no music, no animation, no dramatic build-up. Just facts arranged the way truth gets arranged when it has been patient long enough, and the moment has finally arrived. Nadine's Ground LLC Total Holdings portfolio. 43 properties across 5 states. Commercial holdings on Pembroke Street, Aldridge Avenue, and the entire Westfield corridor, the same corridor the city had rezoned 11 years ago, which Zola had quietly and methodically positioned herself in front of before a single other investor had thought to look at the zoning board minutes. A private equity stake in 3 regional development firms. A mineral rights portfolio acquired through a land inheritance, and 15 years of patient legal strategy with Cornelius Tate. The Aldridge Community Center renovation is underway in full. Total asset valuation at the current market, $20 billion. The tent didn't just go quiet, it stopped. Like someone had pressed pause on every conversation, every breath, every thought happening under those canopy lights simultaneously. $20 billion, built quietly, built in the same community where people had watched this woman get served divorce papers at her own birthday party 6 weeks ago, built while her husband assumed she had nothing, built while his mother was constructing legal strategies around the certainty that Zola Beaumont was a woman without real standing. And near the bottom of the slide, listed plainly among the residential holdings with no emphasis, no highlight, no dramatic font, the address on Delwood Avenue. The house. The backyard with the magnolia tree. The ground Odessa had stood on when she delivered those divorce papers. The crowd read it. Then the crowd understood it. All of it. All at once. Tremaine's drink slipped in his hand. He caught it. Barely. His face was the face of a man watching the entire mathematical foundation of the last 2 years of his life. Every assumption, every plan, every quiet confidence that he knew the shape of his situation simply collapse. Not dramatically. Just quietly and completely, the way things collapse when the ground they were built on was never actually theirs. Odessa's grip on her clutch tightened until her knuckles went white. Her eyes moved from the screen to Zola, back to the screen, back to Zola, searching for an error that was not there, searching for something she could reframe, reposition, repackage into a version of events that still made her right. There was nothing to find. Celestine stood between them and looked at Tremaine, then on the screen, then back at Tremaine one final time, and something moved across her face that had nothing to do with shock or loyalty or love. It was arithmetic, pure and cold and immediate. A woman who had always been reading a balance sheet, doing what such women do the moment the numbers change without warning. She was already composing her exit before the murmuring in the tent had fully begun. That murmuring started at the far tables and rolled inward like a slow tide, people leaning close, piecing it together in real time, connecting the birthday party to this moment, connecting the divorce papers on the table to the address on the screen, connecting the woman who had stood in that backyard and said absolutely nothing and nodded once and held her daughters steady, to the woman who had been standing in front of them this whole time, owning all of it. On her way out of the tent, Zola passed the table where Tremaine was standing. She did not stop. She did not speak. She did not look at him with triumph or fury, or the expression of a woman who needed him to understand the full weight of what had just happened. She simply walked past him in that deep green gown, with that unhurried stride that had never once changed, regardless of what she was walking through. And as she passed, she reached up and touched the small gold key pendant at her throat. Not for him, not for the room, Not for any of the people who had watched and whispered and were only now beginning to understand. For Nadine. It was always for Nadine. The divorce did not go the way Odessa had engineered it. The documents Tremaine had signed without reading, the ones his mother had prepared and slid across the table to him in the weeks after the birthday party, the ones he had trusted completely because he had always trusted her judgment above his own, contained provisions that his attorneys would later describe, carefully and with visible discomfort, as severely unfavorable to him. When those attorneys learned the full scope of what Zola actually held, $20 billion in assets, a real estate portfolio across 5 states, commercial holdings in the very corridors that were appreciating fastest in the region, the aggressive posture they had planned dissolved overnight. They stopped talking about winning and started talking about minimizing damage. The Delwood Avenue house transferred cleanly back into Zola's trust without a fight worth describing. Tremaine's financial position, once the actual numbers were laid against each other, was a fraction of the size he had been living inside his head for 2 years. He was not destroyed, but he was standing in a significantly smaller place than the one he had imagined. And in a community where perception operates as its own economy, the story that circulated was not the story Odessa had authored. It was the one the gala screen had told in plain numbers for an entire room to read. Neighbors who had stood in that Delwood backyard 6 weeks earlier. Family friends who had watched a woman receive divorce papers at her own birthday party while her daughters held each other's hands, and a grown man found the ground more interesting than his wife's face. They had the complete picture now, and people move differently once they have the complete picture. Some said nothing directly to Tremaine or Odessa. They simply adjusted. Calls that used to come in regularly stopped coming. Invitations that used to extend without question stopped extending. Seats at tables that used to open for the Beaumont name were somehow filled before they arrived. In a community like theirs, that particular silence is the loudest verdict a person can receive. Celestine was gone within 10 days of the gala. Tremaine's last several messages to her went unanswered without explanation. She was photographed at a professional event not 2 weeks later in an entirely different company, carrying that same easy, unbothered laugh she had been carrying at the birthday party, already 3 full chapters past anything that had involved him. He had believed she was in this with him because she chose to be. He had not understood that she had been reading a balance sheet from the very beginning. When the balance sheet changed without warning, she closed the book and walked away without looking back. Odessa carried the consequences of what she had done the way proud women carry consequences, not by acknowledging them publicly, but by wearing them in the places her face used to be open and easy. The community she had performed the birthday humiliation in front of was the same community that had been sitting under that gala tent when the screen lit up with $20 billion and a Delwood Avenue address. Church mothers, neighbors, people whose respect she had spent 3 decades carefully earning. Some were gracious enough not to say anything to her face. Some were not. She was left in the full harvest of everything she had so carefully planted, her son diminished in standing and in resources, her target standing more firmly than she had ever stood, and her audience holding the complete, unedited story that no amount of social engineering could now revise. The backyard on Delwood Avenue was quiet at 6:15 in the morning. No lanterns, no folding tables. No plum tablecloth or mason jar wildflowers or birthday banner catching the breeze above the gate. Just the yard itself, the way yards look when all the occasion has been cleared away, and only the actual ground is left. The magnolia tree in the corner stood still in the early air. The flower bed along the back fence that Zola had planted in the second spring after they moved into that house held its blooms without requiring anyone's attention or approval. Things that are properly rooted tend to do that. Zola sat at the small iron table near the back door with a mug of coffee held in both hands. She was not planning anything, not calculating the next move or preparing for whatever was coming after this. She was doing something she had not genuinely allowed herself to do in a very long time. She was resting. Actually resting. The way a body rests when the thing it has been braced against for months has finally, completely passed, and the muscles that were holding can slowly, carefully let go. She reached up and touched the small gold key at her collar. She thought about her mother, about Unit 14C and a yellow legal pad and a woman in a hospital laundry uniform sitting across a scratched kitchen table from a 13-year-old girl saying land is the only thing that fights back. She closed her eyes. She let the morning be quiet. Then the back door opened. Imani came out first, hair still wrapped from sleeping, moving with the careful determination of a child who has decided to be awake before her body has fully agreed to it. Zuri was right behind her, one slipper on, one slipper left somewhere inside the house, hopping down the last porch step like that was a completely reasonable way to start a morning. Mama. Zuri ran across the yard in that one slipper and folded herself into Zola's side before she finished the word. Imani came around the other side and leaned in, pressing her forehead against her mother's shoulder the way she had done since she was small enough to be carried in a single arm. Zola put both arms around her daughters. She pulled them in, both girls, all that warmth and morning breath and rumpled yellow pajamas, and she held on with everything she had. The coffee sat completely untouched. Nobody noticed. Nobody cared. The morning light came through the magnolia branches in long, slanted golden lines and fell across the table, across the girls, across Zola's hands spread wide on their backs. Still, unhurried, absolutely full. The specific kind of peace that only arrives after something hard has finally, completely ended, and the ground beneath your feet is yours again, fully and undeniably yours. Then Imani lifted her head. She looked at her mother the way children look at you when they are completely done being careful about what they ask. Mama. Her voice was steady and clear in the morning air. Is everything okay now? For real this time? Zola looked at her oldest daughter. She put one hand gently against her face, and she said yes, simply, directly, without cushioning or qualification or the careful softness that fear uses to pad its answers. The way Nadine used to answer every question that truly mattered. Yes, baby, everything is going to be okay. They thought her silence was emptiness. They looked at her calmly and saw a woman who had run completely out of moves. They read her stillness as submission and her patience as weakness. They planned around her like she was furniture in a room they had already decided was theirs. They served her divorce papers at her own birthday party, in her own backyard, in front of her children, in front of people who had come carrying food and cards and genuine love, and they walked out of that yard that evening genuinely believing they had won something real and lasting. They had not won anything. They had simply started a clock. Because a woman who builds before anyone is watching, who roots herself deep and wide before she ever rises, who waits not out of fear but out of absolute certainty about the right moment, she does not need to announce herself. She does not need to argue her position. She does not need to use her power on people who were never paying attention anyway. The ground speaks for her. And when the time finally comes, when the door that has been locked for years finally swings open, everything locked opens all at once. Right on time, every single time. If this story reached something real in you, if you saw Zola in yourself, or in your mother, or in someone you love who has been underestimated and overlooked, and counted out by the very people who were supposed to have their back, drop a comment below right now and tell us what part hit you the hardest. And tell us where you are watching from. Drop your city, drop your state, drop your country. We want to see exactly how wide this community has grown. If you are not subscribed yet, there has never been a better moment than right now. Hit that button. We put everything we have into every single story on this channel, and we are nowhere near done. Share this one tonight. Send it to somebody who needs to be reminded that being quiet is not the same thing as being powerless. That building in silence is still building. That the woman who says the least in the room is sometimes the one who owns it. We will see you in the next one.